Hello, game theorists. This is going to be our last and final lecture on Cheap Talk. Basically, it's going to be in the format of a lecture just delivered by me writing on a piece of paper and you following along. Okay? You're not going to see much of me. All you're going to see is my beautiful hands and my beautiful writing. But that's about it. So we're going to pick off pretty much from where we left off last time, which is on the beer quiche model. So in the beer quiche model, a signal, which was for player one to either choose beer or quiche, was costly and varied with the player's type, which means that the behavior of a player conveyed information. Now, we will consider a class of games for which an action or a signal is costless. And what I mean by this is that remember that a strong type, when he drank beer, became stronger, and a weak type, when he drank beer, became weaker. This is not going to be the case. The signal that player one sends is not going to cost him anything in his payoffs. So a signal is costless, which means it does not affect the payoff of the player that is choosing it, or any other player for that matter. We use costless actions to influence people's behavior every day. What are these actions? I hear you ask. Well, the most common actions that are costless are words. Okay, and these can come from anyone that considers themselves an expert in a field, and which you have to actually take advice from them or not. Usually this comes from politicians, but mostly this has been studied in the field of medicine, which is very interesting. Okay, and we will look at exactly that case. And in the end of this lecture, we will discover that in fact it can be applicable to the pandemic that we see today and the way that we read the information that is being given to us. All the different types of expert advice. How can we collate all of this disparate information? But to do this, we have to first design our game. Ooh. Okay. So what we are modeling are costless signals. And the costless signals that we like to model are words. Okay? Costless actions. Now, this is where the terminology changes a bit. Costless actions are known as messages. Any kind of signal that is costless is called a message. And signaling games with costless messages are called cheap talk games. Because talk is cheap. So what is message M? Right? What are these messages that we call M? Well, M does not need to be words proper. It can be a facial gesture, a wink, or it can be anything another player can observe. The messages or the message has a literal meaning. Any message that is being sent to you has a literal meaning, which may be ambiguous. And this is the key point, that the message has an element of ambiguity. The content of M does not necessarily coincide with the literal meaning of M. Okay, so content is not necessarily the literal meaning of M. Now, what do I mean by that? In my world, okay, I'm going to give you an example from my world. I'm an American and a Brazilian. I was born in Brazil and I lived in the US, and I'm pretty much from all over the world. But my culture is Brazilian, my accent is American, and so I'm kind of a child of both worlds. But there's an interesting aspect to gestures in the way that I speak. So the hand signal, I don't know if you guys know this, okay, right? This is the okay signal in the US. When you say when somebody asks you out, do you want to go and get a beer? Or do you want to go and watch a movie? And you're from a distance, what do? Okay, sure, see you later. Fine. In Brazil, should the same a question be asked to you, and you do this, they will take it as a severe insult, and what it really means is no way, never, under no circumstances. So if I were to give this signal to someone, how would they know what am I using it, in which context I'm using it in? It's an ambiguous signal coming from me. And that is M. The sender of the message may want to deceive. Now, me doing this to my friend, I might be saying the truth and saying, yeah, sure, of course, I want to see you later. Or maybe it's just some guy who asked me out randomly on the street, never seen me before, and I said, okay. And I actually meant it, no way. Okay, so that message can be deceiving. But remember that in game theory there is no lying. We cannot lie. Say the sender wants to lie. Under game theoretic rules of rational behavior, a player can prevent others from observing the real content of the message. So twisting facts, the ideas of fake news and everything else can all be complexly analyzed under this type of game. But what I'm trying to introduce you to is the simplest form for this. And so think of it in terms of the okay sign, whether it's okay for Brazil or it's an okay for the US. So again, let's just go through the costless M. It's an assumption, of course, that there is no cost to sending a misleading message. This is not really the case. I mean, research and development and all sorts of political correctness and different ethics departments go to a lot of effort, and companies go to a lot of effort to come up with different slogans which are as ambiguous as possible in order to attract as many consumers as possible. But the word itself, the act of speech itself, does not cost anything. So that's what we're honing in on. We're eliminating all of the industry of marketing, and we're just honing in to the spur of the moment words that somebody can give you. There is no cost to sending a misleading message, of course. Again, so if a message is correct, there's no cost, but there's also no cost to a message that is misleading. So there's no cost to lying. So in other words, there is no prior probability. There is no presumption that messages are truthful because talk is cheap, talk is worthless. There is no way for you to update your beliefs according to Bayes' rule because there is no cost to this signal. So the question becomes one of information transmission. This is another important point for us to raise. When is there information transmission if M is costless? Or when are messages informative? Or, to put it in more game theoretic terms, we are searching for separating equilibria. When will a message allow me to identify what is exactly being told? Or at least hinting at the correct action I should take. Okay. Now, what's important about this game, and the reason why I would like to introduce it as the final game in our lecture, is because it is a model with many discontents for the game theoretic community. In equilibrium analysis, there is no lying. There is no such thing as lying or mistakes. It doesn't exist. Because the intention to deceive is taken into account by the other player. Now we know that in real life we are deceived. We are deceived constantly. Okay, if it's not by our credit card companies or our insurance companies or whatever it is that we're purchasing, or the person on the street that's selling us a particular gadget, we do not have full information about how much that gadget costs. He is an expert. He knows exactly how much it costs, but he's sending you a costless message and an advice and a signal, and you have to take a decision. And he's trying to deceive you. So what are you going to do? Now, this game, what it does is that it assumes that you're really smart and that you take into account all the possible ramifications of his deceit. And he knows this as well. And he's unable to, in fact, ultimately lie to you or deceive you. So the absence of successful lying in game theory is a big problem. Players are just too smart. And the game, the way it's usually put together is in terms of the medical community, in the sense of how they behave with respect to their patients as expert opinions, okay, or as experts giving advice to people who are non-experts. And in certain situations, how this expert opinion or this expert advice, which is a costless message, can lead to malpractice.